going to discuss how to make an appropriate confession. I should say beforehand that this is my personal way of going about this, but I've also decided to share it by means of a video so that all who are interested in confessing to a validly ordained priest and that have already converted to Catholicism may be able to take advantage without having to go through trial and error. First of all, if a person is going to make a general confession, that an abjuration should be made of the errors and heresies that were previously held before confessing. Obviously, the person should already have been educated in the truth, in the catechism, and done a profession of faith. It is highly recommended that the person prays the full 15 Mystery Rosary and that they read the 4 Synoptic Gospels, or has become interested in doing so. And if one wants to get into a more profound study, the Catholic Councils or Pope encyclicals. A person doesn't have to study all of that in order to make an abjuration. The catechism is enough to know what errors one has sustained. For example, if it's a woman, I held the heresy and error that women should hold an equivalent or superior place to men. That's to say, I held the feminism heresy. It's a heresy that goes against the natural law. Why? Because it denies Genesis, where Eve was made from the rib of Adam. So that could be a good abjuration. Another abjuration that may be applied to many people, and that needs to be abjured for their conversion, is, I abjure having believed in evolution. This is going to be very impacting for many people, on account that many people believe that evolution is a fact. But apart from it being a theory, it's a theory that if you believe in, it literally destroys the gospel. It destroys all of Genesis, and it destroys any confidence that you may have in the Bible. Evolution can be proven from a scientific point of view that it is a complete fake. Cases of irreducible complexity, where various vastly complex mechanisms have to work in a simultaneous manner for an animal to be able to function. And therefore a gradual transformation of that particular animal wouldn't have allowed it to survive. So irreducible complexity, from a scientific point of view, destroys evolution. Now, abjuration is not necessarily done in front of a priest, because in our day, the majority of priests are heretics, but it rather should be done in front of a crucifix. If the person already made the Council of Trent's profession of faith, it's something that is really good, but it's also recommended to do a personal abjuration of previously held beliefs. Making it explicit and writing it down on a private piece of paper is something that is very useful. With all of this made clear, the examen of conscience should be very well defined before making a confession. If one were to make a confession, especially a general confession, where one is beginning to remember their sins just 5 minutes before, then it could be a sinfully negligent confession. And that negligence, if it is grave, can provoke a sacrilegious confession. Therefore, it's necessary that one remembers their sins sufficiently before going to confess them, especially if it's going to be a general confession. One could have their sins formally written down on paper. So let's begin. The most direct form of making a formal general examen of conscience would be by going through each of the 10 commandments and analyzing one's own life based on the commandments. I imagine that every person knows what their dominant defect is, and we can discuss this further on. Now, the first commandment urges us to love God above all things. How has my person failed this commandment? What have I done wrong? Have I blasphemed? So go through each commandment similarly. Then, the next appropriate thing would be to make a general summary that includes the whole commandment throughout your whole life, and then a particular one. Examples of this would be, I was a person who didn't believe in God during... And then you could be specific. If one didn't believe in God their whole life, then you'd add, my whole life. We also have to be sincere and straightforward. And that would be the general phrase. Now, the specific phrase would be, I promoted atheism from the year 2002 to 2007. That would be a more particular declaration. So we went from the general to the particular, and from the particular, we're going to go to the 3 components that cause sin to destroy the soul. The 3 components are sin itself, the number of sins, and the aggravator. The sin in this case obviously is having promoted atheism. When we make the approximate account of the times these sins were committed, it demonstrates to us that the mercy of God towards us is literally astronomical. So for example, a person promoted atheism in his school and at home, giving a general estimate of approximately actively promoting atheism 7 times per day. So we can do an average of 7 times a day multiplied by 365 times gives us 2,555. That amount multiplied by 20, supposing the person had promoted atheism for 20 years, would give a level of grave mortal sins committed 51,100 times. By putting the most approximate number possible, it truly gives us an idea of the mercy God has had with us, with only that single mortal sin. Now let's take into account another example, one that is probably more painful. According to studies, people are capable of having 70,000 thoughts a day. That's the average capacity of a human being. A person that is drenched in sin will practically have all his thoughts be not only sinful, but mortally sinful. Thoughts of vengeance, discord, pride, gluttony, thoughts against purity, blasphemies, etc. Let's conservatively estimate that half of those thoughts were mortally sinful, and the other half were neutral thoughts like, I'm going to school, I'm hungry, etc. Because even persons who watch TV could commit mortal sins if they, for example, see something impure on TV and say, wow, I like this. It would be a mortally sinful thought because you're giving consent to evil. But let's give a conservative estimate that half of those 70,000 thoughts are mortally sinful. That would be a total of 12,775,000 mortal sins per year. And multiply that by 20 years would give a total of 255,500,000 mortal sins for 20 years. When one gets to see the approximate number, one realizes the level that is so literally extraordinary of the mercy God has shown to us, and that's only from a conservative point of view. If one makes a mathematical statement about this, the impression that is left on the soul and the graces that can be harvested from this rational impression are vast, because one says, wow, I have really been someone evil. One can sincerely perceive this once they have seen their sins in a more detailed light. Now, with the number added, the confession may look like this. I have had mortally sinful thoughts and have plainly consented in them with respect to all the capital sins, approximately 255,500,000 times in the last 20 years of life. This could prove to be very fruitful for the soul, to help fly away from sin, and to make a firm purpose of amendment. So having taken into account each commandment, made a general summary and a particular declaration, then it's very important to get straight to the point. For example, if one were to confess that they had sinful enmity with their brother and that they had hated each other, well, a bad confession in this case would be, my brother would hurt me, he insulted me, and it was his fault. That's to say that what one begins to say is not what one did or what one is guilty of, rather pointing to someone else's fault. This is something that is a very strong vice within persons that haven't yet focused on making their spiritual life better. People can make bad confessions by attempting to justify their sins while confessing them. In other words, they might give so many reasons or explanations, etc., that they basically excuse themselves for the sins they have committed, and in so doing can make a bad confession. What did one do? Focus on that. Also, another thing that's important is not to add a lot of hey. Don't insert the story. I was walking and my brother arrived and later he began to tell me, but I began to say, etc. That is, to make the story long. That's the worst thing one can do, and above all, during a general confession, because we're talking about a lifetime. It would make it an extremely long confession, and it won't allow you time to confess everything that you'd like to confess. So instead of relating every circumstance as if it were a soap opera, we're going to say this. The sin? What was the sin? Hatred. Discord. What were the amount of times committed? Well, we've already given 2 examples of how to get an estimate. If it was a very violent relationship and there were approximately 50 daily collisions of insults, blows, etc., that can be the starting point. 50 mortal sins of discord multiplied by the period that one knows for sure that the sin was committed. Then, having written down the number of sins committed, let's ponder on the aggravator. The aggravator can be a situation that had made that particular sin grave. Obviously, not all the mortal sins that one has committed, although mortally sinful, can have this aggravator. They're like certain exceptions of evilness. Let's say, for example, that the case of discord with the brother got to such an extreme that one thought of murdering their brother literally and in a serious sense. That would be the aggravator for that mortal sin. Now, thinking of that aggravator, one can group the aggravators, which may not be that many, but it's important to point them out and say, the aggravator was that on a certain amount of occasions, I seriously thought of killing my brother. Okay, so the aggravator generates two things. Confession becomes more explicitly good and appropriate without becoming confusing and rude. This also gives the person confessing more graces, as it makes you more aware of the poverty that your soul is in, or was in, and this could possibly cause one a powerful impulse to change. Finally, to be on the safe side, let's add some spiritual insurance, just for the fact that the memory tends to fail. Even though one may have all the best intentions, our memory can fail on account of deficiency in the grace of God to see the complete panorama. The memory can fail, judgment can fail, the perception one has about sin can fail. If one is just beginning their conversion, it could happen that their perception of sin is defective, or it may also not be completely precise. So in this case, let's add the clause that will garner us graces in this aspect, and will also save us from the precipice of a sacrilegious confession. It can be an imperfect confession if one is negligent in adding this. What is it I mean? Add to your confession, and this was recommended by Padre Pio. If I have forgotten something by negligence, by unwillful forgetfulness, or by ignorance, by lack of judgment, or by a deformed conscience, I include it in my confession, and I await in the mercy of God that He may forgive all my sins, and give me light to remember them, and confess them as soon as I get the opportunity. All the sins of my life I detest, rebuke, and reject. I ask for the forgiveness of all of them, without any excuse that may diminish the malice of each and every one of them. With this, one is already putting the good intention of two things. First, if he forgot something or couldn't perceive that something was a sin on account that he believed it wasn't a sin because of ignorance, then one is really willfully including something that they are not able to know with reason, where understanding fails and where instruction has not yet arrived. So that's why it's very important. The fact that one is asking for God for more light so that in the future one may be able to say, whoa, that particular thing I was doing was also sin. Or maybe, oh, buying on Sunday was also a mortal sin and I did it. Which, on a side note, is also a very important topic, something that not a lot of people know, the mortal sin of buying on Sunday. So by adding this spiritual insurance, Christ can give us major graces to understand our sins in the future, and at the same time they will have already been forgiven. One would simply subsequently confess them for greater glory to God and a greater sanctification of their souls. On another side note, if a person realizes that an action was mortally sinful, that action was forgiven because of that spiritual insurance we added, but that sinful action has to be explicitly confessed the next time you go to confession. Otherwise, you commit another mortal sin. I bet that anyone, if by pure play makes an examinative conscience of this style and begins to make honest approximations of how many sins they have committed, they will be surprised at how the mercy of God is astronomical. Well, that's all. Thanks for listening to this video. Subscribe.